members this evening relates to an area outlined in red. However, the outline permission relates to the area outlined in blue, so it is part of the wider development site. The site is located to the east of Alfold Road, and it comprises open fields measuring approximately 3.6. So this shows an aerial of the application site. Members will note that this site, which is outlined, it falls to the south of what is known as the Little Meadows site. That's currently under development with residential development. And then the Barclays home site is this one further to the north. So as mentioned, the application site comprises an open field. The top left photo shows Alfold Road, where the site access would be provided. The bottom one shows the western boundary, so this is the boundary that you can see in this photo here, but taken within the site. And then the main photograph here just shows the field in full. So turning to the site's master plan. So this shows the wider site area, which was subject of the outline application. Outline permission was granted in August 2017 for the erection of 265 dwellings and formation of public parkland. Access was determined at the outline stage. So the wider site essentially comprises 3 areas. So we've got the public park phase to the very east, we've got the current application site in the centre, and then future residential developments to the west of Alfold Road. So the principle of 265 dwellings across the entire site has been established, as has access. So turning to the current application site. So the current application seeks approval for layout, appearance, scale and landscaping for phase 1 of what will be the residential development. And to just provide an overview of each of these elements. So firstly, the layout. The plan shows 67 dwellings spread across the site. There's a central spine road which runs along the northern area of the site. That comes off the approved access off Alfold Road. There's going to be secondary roads coming off the main central spine road to serve the residential units. We've got pedestrian pathways running to the north and the south of the site, and these would connect both to the north and the east. And then we've got areas of open space and play areas to the north of the site. In terms of scale, the dwellings to be provided will all be 2-storey, with some single-storey elements such as garaging and detached bin and cycle stores as well to serve the apartments. In terms of appearance, dwellings would be of a more contemporary design, would feature some detailing such as pitched roofs, gables, recesses, framed entrances, balconies and chimneys, but I will take members through the elevational details in due course. Turning to landscaping, there would be planting within the site boundaries, private amenity areas would be grassed, there would be some close bordered fencing demarcating the private amenity areas. We've got some low hedging and shrub planting along the street scene. There's going to be some black metal fencing at the site entrance and a mixture of hard surfaces within the site. So the main central spine road would be tarmacked, and then the shared hard surfaces would feature block paving, and there would be gravel hogging footpaths. So the site would feature a mixture of market and affordable units. A total of 14 out of the 67 units would be affordable. These are shown in the purple and the yellow. Separately, and as part of the Section 106 agreements attached to the outline permission, there are to be units provided under the current scheme. These are shown in green, known as the Knoll Park Trust units. These are to provide a long-term income to support the maintenance and management of the public park to the east. So this plan shows some details of the connections through the site. So I've previously mentioned there are going to be some pedestrian and cycle routes through, providing connections to the north and the east. There's also going to be an emergency services route connecting some of the secondary routes here. That's going to be a reinforced grassed route there. So turning to parking. In total, the scheme would provide 437 allocated spaces to serve the units, and there would also be 30 unallocated visitor spaces. So the location of the visitor spaces I've just shown in green on site, just to show the spread of those spaces. The majority of the allocated spaces are going to be provided within the plots for the dwellings that they would serve, so either in the form of garages or on the driveway. The parking spaces to serve the flatted units would be within a courtyard here. 4 of these would be in a car barn. So the total parking provision on site would accord with the council's parking guidelines. There is a recommended condition set out in the agenda report which would restrict the use of the garages for parking and incidental storage. Just touching on the height and the scale, so as previously mentioned, all of the built form would, well, the majority would be 2-storey, all the dwellings. We've got some single-storey elements there shown in blue. Turning now to refuse. Refuse vehicles would drive along the main central spine road. Collectors would walk to the bin collection points, so those are shown in blue. So residents would walk up to the collection points and then the refuse collectors would walk down to meet at the collection points. The council's refuse and recycling coordinator has confirmed that the distances that both residents and the refuse collectors would have to walk would accord with our guidance. There would be storage provided within private amenity spaces for storage of refuse and recycling. And then there would be some communal stores as well for the flatted units to the west of the site. So before taking you through the elevational designs, this is just to show the material palette. So there would be a mixture of brickwork, tile hanging and timber boarding. And there is a recommended condition that would secure samples of the materials to be submitted. So the next few slides will show the proposed dwelling types. As mentioned, the dwellings would each feature differing architectural features and would be of a relatively contemporary appearance. So the first slide shows some 2- and 3-bed properties. And then moving on, we've got some of the 3- and 4-bed properties. And again, these are moving on, so some of the 4- and the larger 5-bed units. And then these are the apartment buildings, which would be to the west of the site. So turning now to street scenes. So the following 2 slides will show the street scenes. The top one here shows the dwellings along the western boundary. And then the middle one is the vertical section through the site here. And then the far one is section along the eastern boundary. So the top street scene here, these are the collection of residential units to the very north of the site. So this is north of the central spine road. So this would be where the 2 play areas would be either side. And then the middle, we've got the dwellings then that would be immediately adjacent to the central spine road, but to the south. And then the bottom one then is the very southern area of the site on the southern boundary. So I'll take you through some next slides just showing some 3D visuals of the site. So this particular one is the site entrance. And then we've got some of the northern section of the site with the play area you can just see here. And so again, this is the sort of the linear park open space area to the north. And this is what's known as the sort of the rural edge. So this is the middle of the site looking from the south up to the north. And then this one just shows a 3D aerial image of the proposed scheme. So this is the application site here. And then this is actually in practice to the north of the application site. This is the little meadow site that I referred to in the location plan. So the public park phase of the development would be to the east, which is this area on the left. And we've got Alford Road then shown on the right-hand side, but that is to the west of the application site with the access coming in. So the matters of principle and technical opinion and matters of judgment are shown on the slide. I would like to take this opportunity just to draw members' attention to the update sheets. There are several amendments which have been set out on a written update sheet. Largely, this relates to amendments to conditions following receipt of some amended plans. So firstly, the plan numbers condition has been updated to reflect the submission of landscaping plans. Those have been reviewed by the Council's tree officer, and officers are satisfied with the details. There's also some amendments to the obscure glazing, which is condition 4, following receipt of a window specification sheet. And following some communication with the County Highway Authority, we've slightly revised the wording of conditions 6 and 7, and those are for bicycle storage and electric vehicle charging points. And following the submission of the landscape plans, which we are happy with, the Council's tree officer has confirmed that condition 16, which was the submission of a landscaping scheme, that can now be deleted. So what were conditions 17 and 18 have now been renumbered to be 16 and 17. There is a verbal update to provide as well. Again, this relates to conditions. We are, as officers, recommending that an additional condition, which would be number 18, is put on. If I read that out, it's in relation to the ecology report and would read as follows. The development hereby approved shall be carried out in strict accordance with the measures and actions detailed within the preliminary ecological appraisal dated November 2017, prepared by EcoSulis. And that's just to protect the ecology interests of the site. There's also an amendment to condition 15, just to ensure compliance essentially with the ecology information. So condition 15 relates to space within the site for parking of vehicles, loading and unloading of plants, storage of plants and cement mixing. The condition at present reads that those areas shall be minimally sited 8 metres from mature trees and 4 metres from hedgerows. The ecology report references a hedgerow buffer of 5 metres, so it's just been reworded to refer to 5 metres instead of 4 metres from hedgerows. So the revised recommendation, recommendation B remains as set out on the update sheet, but recommendation A is just changed to refer to that additional condition 18 and the amended condition 15. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Rebecca. Could you just explain to members why we have a recommendation A and a recommendation B, and what happens if we only agree with one of them or neither of them? Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, just to explain that. So we've set out 2 different recommendations simply because as part of the current reserve matters application, the applicant is also seeking, as well as the approval of the reserve matters, also seeking approval for some of the conditions information and the obligations set out in the 106 agreement, which is attached to the outline permission. So it's just to separate those matters out so that there's a clear resolution in place for all things being sought under the current application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Rebecca. Before we move on to debate, contrary to what I said earlier, Councillor Patricia Ellis will be acting as a substitute as she covers or comes from the same area as Councillor Denis. So, members, over to you. Nothing to be said. Oh, Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just a couple of questions, really. In the National Space Standards, I have found it very helpful to have the little coding which says sort of 2B for 2 bedrooms, 3P for 3 persons. Now, in our report here, we have house type on page 32, and we have, excuse me, for example, a 2B1, a 3B1, and yet opposite 3B1 there's 3 bed, 5 or 6 persons. Where does this, how do I interpret 2B1, 3B1 and some of the others that are down there, 3B3 and 5B1 in that listing?
Rebecca?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Lee. Just to confirm, that house type, so that's what the plans that the applicant has submitted, that's what they set the house type out as. And then just to provide a little bit more information, I've just set out the bed numbers. So having regard to the submitted floor plans, that is then confirming the number of beds and also the number of people within each dwelling. Thank you.
Does that clarify matters, Councillor Lee? Yes. Jolly good, thank you. Councillor James.
Thank you, Chairman. One question, there'll probably be a really simple answer. On page 37, 8 and 9, under the conditions, your first bit says agreed stroke not agreed. And then you've got NA, which normally to me is not applicable, but presumably that is not agreed. Because I'd like to know the difference between something that is not agreed and something is no, will need to be submitted separately, because number 38 and number 25 are hours of construction. I know there have been some concerns, and they say it's either not applicable or it's not agreed. And if it's not agreed, why shouldn't it be submitted separately? Because I can't see any conditions about the time of construction. Thank you. And the second one was, you in your presentation you said there would be metal gates at the entrance. In showing the slides under the entrance, there's some people on a bicycle with wooden fencing and stuff, not metal. There, it's wood, but I can't see any metal.
Over to
Sorry
you,
about
officers.
that. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor. Yes, it probably could have been NA in all honesty. I think where I've put NA, so for example for conditions 2 and 3, those wouldn't require any information to be submitted full stop. So for example, conditions 8 and 9, they would require information to be submitted. However, that would be prior to occupation as opposed to needing to submit it as part of the current application. So apologies for any confusion. Essentially, they don't need to provide that information as part of the current application.
But, so on the construction, hours of...
So I believe that will be likely within the construction environmental management plan.
Okay.
I would imagine looking at that, that's condition 24. So that hasn't been submitted as part of the current application.
Okay.
However, they will need to submit it prior to commencement of development. I'd have to check the exact wording, but I would imagine it's a pre-commencement.
I find that very important.
Apologies for any misunderstanding.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Hyman.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a couple of things which I haven't managed to find in the documents in respect of discharging condition 7. So it's all the Part B recommendation, really, that I'm looking at the moment. On page 19 of our officer report, under the consultations and parish council comments under County Highway Authority, the first of the respondents that are listed. The third paragraph on page 19 says that further information is required in connection with condition 7, but I think we're looking to discharge condition 7. I'm always a little bit concerned about when we have these planning applications in front of us here as members, discharging conditions when we don't really know everything about them without reading every one of the planning application documents and remembering everything that happened back to a year and a half ago as well. Obviously we're used to the officers discharging these, and to some extent, if we're discharging them, we're taking responsibility for that, and so I'd probably want to know more about it. I can't find anything that... I'm sure it's there somewhere, and your officer will be able to tell me. The further information that's required in connection with condition 7, what is it? Has it been provided? Because if it hasn't, then perhaps we shouldn't be discharging that. My greater concern with this application, though, Chairman, is in respect of the whether the Section 106 agreement is tight enough to be able to ensure that the development in full, the whole of it, I appreciate this is just phase 1, but that the whole of the development is delivered, and in particularly the public park. I was looking at the Section 106 agreement when I saw earlier today. I haven't had a chance to speak to officers about it, but I saw that in the Section 106 there was a paragraph 311 that says no obligations, there are no obligations upon the developer over land that isn't in its ownership. And it seems to me that the public park isn't going to get provided unless we've got 200 homes built first of all. And so I'm thinking, well, if the developer only builds 198 homes, so this plus another, a stage 2, what protection do we have? Do we have an absolute guarantee that we're going to end up with that public park, or could they sell it on at that point? What could we do if they did? Would we be able to ensure that the original outline application that was granted consent, with environmental impacts, but on balance, because we had a public park being put in, then it was considered to be okay? The situation may be changed because when I look at the affordable housing provision in this at 21% and a 40% across the board, whereas it looks like we're leaving all the affordable housing to another park that may never ever get provided for all we know, and we may also end up without a park, and the whole thing could go pear-shaped. And I really want to know a bit more about what protection we have in the Section 106 agreement. So that's really what I'd like officers to explain, but just as an additional comment to that. The Section 106 I find to be very difficult because they've duplicated paragraph numbers and missed out paragraph numbers in the draft S106 that was produced some time ago. Well, I think we need to add some extra wording to the conditions, the one that discharges or agrees with the Section 106 issues there of Clause 531. That needs to be specified that it's in Schedule 2, Part 1 of the Section 106, I think. Because if you look through, you'll find that actually in there there's 2 paragraph 3.1s, 2 paragraph 3.2s, the different wording in them in the Section 106, and we could just chuck this out on this basis and tell them to go away and write it properly, or we can try and make good what we've got in front of us, Chairman.
Thank you. Officers, would you like to comment on the robustness of the Section 106 and the duplicate numbering of clauses?
Thank you, Chairman. I am happy to comment, but if members could bear with me while I just kind of work my way through the agreement, I'd be grateful. So just for a couple of minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members like to comment? Sorry? Sorry? Yes, please. Yeah, please do.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, I've just realised that I didn't come back on the metal fencing point, so apologies for that. I have just checked the amended landscaping master plan that's been submitted. There would be a small section of metal fencing along the site entrance, so that 3D visual doesn't show the metal fencing, but it would nevertheless be provided. Just to come back on a couple of Councillor Hyman's queries. So firstly, with regards to that condition 7 and the County Highway Authority response on page 19, there were further comments received on the 30th of October following submission of just some additional information. So as it stands, the County Highway Authority is satisfied that they have sufficient information to discharge condition 7. They have recommended a new condition be imposed. That is, I believe, condition 7 recommended for the current application. That's just to secure final details. The wording goes above and beyond what was attached to the outline permission. So that recommended condition has come from the County Highway Authority, but they are satisfied that condition 7 can be discharged. Just to touch on the point then about the numbering and the clauses of the Section 106. So recommendation B specifically refers to the clauses set out within Schedule 2. So it might be that that is sufficient. I'll leave Lewis to check exactly how the numbering system works. If we need to submit, add in Part 1, I believe it might be, then we can do. But it does refer specifically to Schedule 2 and those clauses. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Rebecca. Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was interested to wait and listen to my fellow members' thoughts on this application. It is of a contemporary design, and I suppose you either like it or you hate it, perhaps a bit like Marmite. I'm not particularly keen on the design, but it is definitely different from anything else that we have in that area at the moment. I am very glad that officers have included the ecology report now as a condition, because there were some very important items within there to protect habitat on the site, and also about the buffer zone and the retention of hedgerows within the site as well. I am a little bit concerned about the provision of the 3 houses to support the parkland. There are 3 houses which are going to be part of the Knoll Park Trust, and this is meant to be, the money from those is going towards the parkland. However, having not seen any parkland management plan as yet, it is difficult to make a decision on whether or not how the scheme all ties together, to see whether or not, you know, how much money is required to support the actual parkland, and whether these 3 units alone, how much percentage of the money is coming from these 3 units, and how they are going to contribute towards the overall scale of the parkland. I've looked at the actual drawings of the parkland, and the actual proposal does look, you know, very impressive, and it also looks very expensive. So my concerns are to tie down these houses as much as possible within whether or not it's covered by the Section 106, or whether it requires additional wording to make sure that these houses are there in perpetuity for the management of the parkland itself. I haven't seen pictures of the black metal fencing, which I would have liked to have seen to comment. This is a very rural road, and I'm not sure that black metal fencing across the front entrance is really going to be something which is going to add to what is meant to be quite a green. It's got a linear park within it. They're sort of emphasising the green and natural sort of state of the actual site itself. So I would like to see what that metal fencing does actually look like. I have also concerns about the trees on the site that are being lost. Again, there are some very large oak trees on the front of the site there on the Alfold Road, and where the entrance is going in, I'd like to know how many trees are actually going to be lost of the large trees. I got slightly confused about the condition on highways. Perhaps the officers could go through that again, and the discharge of condition 7 and it being covered by another condition within the application here. Perhaps officers could go through that. And again, I share my fellow members' concern about there only being 21% affordable housing on this site. You know, this site was meant to be delivering overall a high level of affordable housing, and it's a shame that this site itself doesn't include the 37% which is covered on the other areas. But perhaps the officers could come back to me on some of those points. Thank you.
Certainly. Rebecca, Chris, one of you like to address some of those?
Thank you, Chairman. I might need a little bit longer just to look into some of them, but if I can come back on just a few of them to start with. So the metal fencing, if members feel that metal fencing wouldn't be appropriate for the area, it could be that we could recommend an additional condition, something along the lines of, notwithstanding the submitted landscaping plans, details of the fencing to be provided at the site access shall be submitted to and approved in writing. So that's a possibility. Just turning to the highways condition. So if you just bear with me. So condition 7 on the outline permission just simply referenced a scheme to be submitted to provide for electric vehicle charging points in accordance with Surrey County Council's car parking guidance. So a scheme has been submitted. The County Highway Authority, however, feel that there is a need for further information to be submitted on a longer-term maintenance and management side of things, which the wording of the outline condition they felt didn't quite set out. So that's why they've suggested a new condition which specifically refers to that further detail being submitted. So it just goes above and beyond what the original outline condition was. The comments, I think we've had some comments about the 21% affordable housing. Obviously, with developments that are phased, you know, we have had a few cases where the affordable housing obviously wouldn't quite accord with the council's guidance and the policy requirements as part of each phase. However, the Section 106 agreement does specify the number to be provided across the wider site. So we are satisfied that as part of what will be phases 2 and 3, we are satisfied that it can be provided in accordance with the 35% overall. I think there are a couple more points about the public park as well. Just to confirm, and I think this probably touches on some of the comments that Councillor Hyman has raised about the securing and the delivering of the public park phase. Obviously, at the time of the outline and the time of the agreement, the Section 106 agreement, it was considered that the 200th dwelling was an appropriate trigger at that point. What I will say and what I can confirm, we have actually received an application for reserved matters for the public park phase. So that has been submitted to council. It's currently with our validation team for checks. So hopefully that can provide members with some assurance that that public park phase will be delivered. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Lewis, I understand you have an answer now.
Thank you, Chairman. Just adding to what Rebecca said and further to Councillor Hyman's comments regarding the public park, it is right to say that the obligation on the owner is for them to provide and complete the Knoll Park in accordance with the Knoll Park specification no later than occupation of the 200th dwelling. So that is what has been agreed. Obviously, that does not prevent them from providing it earlier, which, as Rebecca said, may well be the case for this application. In the event that, for whatever reason, this scheme is part implemented and they never get to the 200th dwelling, that is, strictly speaking, a possibility. And under those circumstances, there are various ways that the council can seek to secure the provision of the public park. They vary from more kind of general approaches, such as simply negotiating with the developer, exploring the possibility of purchasing the land. But the more specific powers under 94 are to serve completion notices on the developer, which gives the developer a certain period of time by which they have to have completed the planning permission in its entirety, or else the planning permission lapses. So it's quite a significant incentive for them to actually complete the development, which of course would have to be in accordance with the 106 agreement. So it is a potential, but there are ways in which the council can try and deal with that. And just on the plan number point, I'm satisfied that a reference to Schedule 2 is specific enough. It encompasses the clauses that are necessary. So, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Lewis. Councillor Townsend, you wish to come back.
Thank you. It was a question probably for the officers. Whether or not it's possible to tie down the houses at all, the ones that are going to be for the Knoll Park Trust units at all, whether or not it's possible to try and tie that down. Am I understanding that the ownership of this particular site that we're looking at here for the 67 houses is obviously in different ownership than the parkland? Is that what I'm understanding? And also the trees on the front of the site, how many large of the oak trees might be affected? Thank you.
Okay, while the officers are looking at that, Councillor Band.
Thank you, Chairman. Just 2 points. When it comes to the metal fencing on the All4 Road, in principle, I've got no problem with metal fencing because you see it very frequently on major estate parks at the end of from the end of the 19th century and early 20th century. But I think the idea to have some control over what it actually looks like would be appropriate. But it does give more security on the road boundary, and I presume that was the reason why they included it. My main concern, frankly, relates to the disappointing number of affordable houses in this particular phase of development. because by my reckoning, it means phases 2 and 3 together have got to have a 40% affordable housing. And I can see we're on a slippery slope, because when we come to the application for phase 2, which I know we haven't got, if that doesn't match up exactly to 40, phase 3 is going to have an even higher percentage. So somehow we need to fire a warning shot across this developer that phase 2 and phase 3, have to, phase 2, the next one coming forward, does need to have 40% affordable housing. Otherwise, we're going to miss the target for the total site development. And I can see this being pushed into phase 3, which may or may not ever happen. So it gives me cause for concern, this lower number of affordable housing, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Goodridge.
Well, I'm on a similar point about the affordable housing. I don't really like, doing reserve matters rather like a jigsaw puzzle, doing one bit and leaving the other 2 bits for later. I mean, our legal advisor made it clear that the ultimate threat is the outline application would lapse for phases 2 and 3. Well, actually, if it did, and then that phase 2 and 3 bit of land was treated separately, maybe with a different developer, they would then be saying, right, well, your target for that site is the percentage that we now have for affordable housing, and therefore the bit edge red will have got away with 21% and no way of making it up. And that's why I'm a little unhappy on the reserve matters. I appreciate they're separate sites, different side of the road, but they got the outline as one lump, and I would have much preferred to have seen the reserve matters in one lump. Because I can just see them developing this, making a bit of money, deciding not to bother with 2 and 3, and letting it lapse. Now, I don't know the finances of that, whether that would be a crazy thing to do or not, but it does cause me some concern. And I'd like to ask the officers whether there's anything we can do. I mean, the 106 agreement is there. How robust is it? Could we have any recourse against the developer if they didn't develop 2 and 3? But if they went bust, for argument's sake, or wound themselves up, doesn't matter what sort of action we take. If they're a shell company and they've gone, having developed phase 1 and done no more, I just want to get a feel of what risk we're at.
Okay, officers, could we have your thoughts, please? Or do you want some time?
Thank you, Chairman. Just to clarify in terms of the permission lapsing, that situation would only come about if a circumstance arose where the council considered it appropriate to serve a completion notice on them, which is not something we would choose to do lightly. It's an involved process, I believe, which involves having to get the Secretary of State to sign off on the completion notice. But the effect of that notice, I believe, is if they don't complete the development in accordance with that notice, then their permission lapses. So that's the consequence of them not completing the development as originally permitted. The issue of risk in terms of the 106 agreement, obviously we have powers to enforce the obligations that are agreed in the 106 agreement through injunctive proceedings. We could potentially seek mandatory orders which required the developer to carry out certain elements of the development if they were to be in breach of specific obligations. But the 106 is the 106. We can't change that now. We have to work with what's in it. That's all I'd say. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Mulliner.
I think Councillors Band and Goodrich, Chairman, who have raised a very important point, which will affect all phased developments. The first thing, is there any agreed timetable at the moment for phases 2 and 3? Could I ask that question before I make my other comments?
Officers, do you know if there's an agreed timetable for phases 2 and 3?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, we have had a phasing plan that's been submitted and some indicative timeframes as well. But at this stage, they are purely indicative. They don't quite know when they will be in a position to submit, say, for example, pre-application advice on reserve matters, future applications. Obviously, there is an intention on their behalf to submit those applications. And we have got a plan which shows how the western section of the site, so this section here, would likely come forward in 2 phases. But I don't think it can be tied down to a specific time frame, simply because we don't know what circumstances will arise. Thank you, Chairman. Oh, sorry, if I can just pass over to Chris.
Thank you, Chairman. In terms of the Knoll Park dwellings, the 106 agreement has a definition of Knoll Park dwellings within it, and then requires, on submission of the reserved matters, that the Knoll Park dwellings are identified on a plan. So those, there are provisions within the 106 that require that to be provided. Thank you, Chairman.
Am I able to come back?
Could I please come back? Yes, I've got to come. Well, the next question is that if, for some reason, 2 and 3 don't happen, and the penalty of lapsing the planning permission is threatened, if phase 1 has been completed, even occupied, has that any teeth at all? You're not going to evict the owners and knock down the buildings, are you? So what actually happens in that case if phase 1 is completed before phases 2 and 3 are started, and as has been postulated, the developer goes bust or sells on to a third party? What in practice can we do? If the answer is nothing, please just say so. It'll save a lot of time.
I would think it's the same situation if we've given permission for a site of 100 houses with 30% affordable and they build the 70 open market houses and then go bust. It's the same situation, isn't it? So
precisely, Chairman.
I would appreciate the officer's comments.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the power under 94 that I referenced is rarely used, in part because I think the situation where it is necessary is a rare occurrences in themselves. I suspect what happens is the remaining element of the permission that hasn't been completed and that the council is seeking to be completed essentially ceases to have effect. I can't imagine 94 would have the effect of rendering completed dwellings unlawful. I can't see that would be the intention of the section in the power, because the whole purpose of the power is to encourage completion. So it would be a strange side effect if it meant that existing dwellings became unlawful. I don't suspect that would be an issue.
So your answer is nothing?
Yes, in a roundabout way, potentially, yes.
Spoken like a true lawyer. And my last question, viability. Is there anything to stop this applicant coming back, as Councillor Goodrich has wisely pointed out, if we allow this application to have less than 35%, can they then say that doing 40% or 45% in phase 3 is no longer viable, and can they please have an amendment?
I think the answer is yes, isn't it?
Thank you again for the question. I think if it was the case that, well, if it was the case that the developer was arguing that the provision of affordable housing was no longer viable, they would have to come in with a Section 73 application, I believe. I don't think it would be appropriate for them to try and amend the provision of affordable housing under a reserved matters application, because I think we would argue that such a change would be so substantial that it would change the nature of the outline permission. which is clearly not something that a reserve matters application is intended to do. So obviously they are entitled to apply to us to vary the amount of affordable housing, and they would need to have sound evidence to show that is acceptable. But I think we would certainly resist doing that under the scope of a reserve matters application for a subsequent phase.
Thank you. My final question, therefore, from this is, are we therefore entitled to refuse this reserve matters application on the grounds it does not give the desired amount of affordable housing in this phase?
Sorry, Chairman, just to confirm, I mean, the provision of the 35% affordable housing has been secured as part of the 106 agreement. At this stage, obviously, we're looking at the first phase of the reserve matters. There's no evidence before us at this present time to suggest why they couldn't provide it under the future phases, phases 2 and 3. So you'd be pretty much preempting something. And I think, personally, on that basis, we'd struggle to refuse the current scheme. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Byam.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, first of all, about the metal fencing against wooden fencing, I agree with Councillor Byam. I think actually metal fencing would look much more elegant and slim than wooden fencing, and is much more relevant to countryside estates and entrances than wooden fencing, I would have thought. And I think of the amount of deer fencing that's around the countryside here, for instance. If that were all wood, it would be much more intrusive, and therefore, I mean, design for design, we don't know what that is at the moment, but I would think that's right. But that's this point about affordable housing, and I understand and listen with great interest. Am I wrong to think that we already knew that there was going to be a phasing thing which wouldn't necessarily put equal amounts of affordable housing in each phase, or am I thinking of another development in Cranley? Because presumably there is a problem of finance anyway, and that having less affordable housing will give them more financial clout for all the development of the next phases.
Thank you. While the officers Councillor Townsend, you wish to come back, and I have remembered that your question about oak trees hasn't been answered yet. Thank you.
Yes, if that could be answered, that would be great. I just wonder the question about tying down the houses for the Knoll Park Trust, because if at the moment it says that they just have to be identified on the map or something, the officers said. And I'd really quite like to know whether it's possible to have some kind of a condition to ensure that they can't be tied to a trust that actually hasn't been created yet. I'm finding it a bit difficult because the actual trust doesn't appear in place yet. All we can do is identify them on the actual application. But I just want to know if we can tie them in a bit more with a condition so that they have to be provided in perpetuity, and that they are tied. Because if there's an ownership, if this land is in a different ownership to the parkland, perhaps, you know, legally we just need to tie it down a little bit more, I feel. Thank you. And the trees.
And the trees. Officers, comments, please.
Yes, sorry, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. Just to pick up on the trees, there is a recommended condition that would secure the submission of an updated tree protection plan. However, at the outline stage, it was set out the trees to be removed. So there would be an oak tree that would be removed to enable the construction of the access, which was agreed at the outline stage. There was also T17, which was to allow the construction of a dwelling, and part of a group, what was then referred to as G5, to enable the construction of access roads. So that was all set out at the outline stage on a tree protection plan. Council's tree officer has recommended a condition that we get an updated tree protection plan, but it shouldn't differ from what that was assessed as part of the outline stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hyman, you wish to come back.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, indeed. I'd also like to thank officers, particularly Lewis, for his candid and full responses, because it's been very helpful. It has made me feel even more like, even more concerned about this, actually, than because I thought that there would possibly be some greater protections than we would have to rely upon the Secretary of State and all sorts of things like that. To me, if we are here, if the whole purpose of the system, so to speak, as officers have said, is to encourage completion, then we're only going to encourage completion by having the more expensive and less profitable elements at the beginning, so that the developer is always encouraged to do the more profitable bits afterwards. And it looks like what we're being asked to do here, and which we were not aware of at the outline stage, is to put all the profitable bits at the beginning, and we're doing the opposite to encouraging completion if we grant consent to this evening. We are encouraging them not to complete the development, effectively, because the expensive bits they can get away with at a later stage, can't they? And I think that's very much what Councillor Mulliner and Councillor Band and Councillor Goodridge have also noticed there. So, I am very concerned about this, because I feel we should be saying that if we're going to have this 37% overall, which is a good rate, but that was that was to, in recognition of the environmental impacts of this development, building on Cranley's green fields, having the public park and having the level of affordable housing were, on balance, why the thing was granting consent in the first place. And now, if there's a chance we're going to lose those, and we find that out now, we're at reserve matters. EIA still applies. It is EIA application, and we are entitled to reconsider whether or not, on balance, we are satisfied with what is in front of us, and whether we ask them to go away and come back with at least 37% affordable housing in this first phase, and perhaps even to, I thank Lewis very much for clarifying that we can't change the section 106, because of course I think he knows I was going to ask that next. So we have to, if we can't change that 200 homes threshold, which is what I'm worried about, where do we go with this? We need to have something in there. What we can do is add an additional condition, of course, which would, I would assume, which could effectively tighten up on that. I don't know how, and I'd like officers' advice on that, because I've never tried doing such a thing. Obviously, it's not in any of my expertise, but I do think it's very dangerous for us to grant consent to something which, I mean, I don't like the design, but as Councillor Townsend says, that's Marmite's job, but you love it or you hate it, and I don't. But that's not a reason for me to, I'd take my steer from the local ward members on that as to what is Cranley's wish. It's not for Farnham to really comment on that, I don't think. I do want to know Councillor Goodridge's point regarding the exfluxion of time and what's going to happen if this, if we don't get stages 2 and 3 here, or if we're fighting to try and get them done, or we're being offered the land, if the developer is offering to sell us the land that we thought we were going to get for free. I don't want this to go anywhere further in that direction. I don't think tonight should allow the developer to continue down that line, and I think we have to be fairly strong and say we want that, certainly want the affordable housing to be above the 37% level, so that later phases would be more attractive to the developer to complete. And I certainly think we do need to add a condition that makes sure that this 200 level, we didn't know at the time, but this 200 level, because this is coming in a number of phases that's since happened, we need to tighten up on that. And I really would like officers to tell us how we can ensure that we get that public park. How can we change it to the number to less than 200, to perhaps 100, to kick it off, so that it has to come in the next phase, Chairman, if you don't mind.
Thank you. I can see the officers are raring to answer all your questions.
Thank you, Chairman. It's more of a general response. Obviously, the application that's in front of everybody today is for reserve matters, and just kind of a reminder that we're looking at page 7 that sets out. We're looking at appearance, landscape, layout, and scale, and a lot of the matters that are being discussed at the moment really are matters of to do with the outline rather than the principle of developing the site rather than those kind of specific areas that we're now drilling down into. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's one question to the officers, as my fellow councillors have asked. Instead of rejecting this application, could they come back, take the application back, and have more affordable houses in that instead of rejecting the application? Defer. That's
Defer.
yeah.
Officers, opinion, please. Before you answer, Councillor Isherwood would like to make a point.
I'd just like to ask one question of the officers. Surely we've had the same situation before with Barclays, with their 400 homes where the affordables are not in stage 1. Am I right or wrong?
Thank you. Yes, from memory, whilst I wasn't involved with the initial phase 1, I believe that there was no affordable to be provided as part of phase 1, and the affordable units were to be provided then as part of the later phases. Obviously, it's a similar phased approach. We knew at the outline stage there was the recommended condition 4 that set out that details of the phased approach shall be submitted. So it was known at the outline stage that this would come forward on a phased approach. As officers, we are required to assess what's before us, what's been submitted. Like I said, there's no reason at this stage, or there's no evidence as to why the affordable housing that's secured as part of the Section 106 couldn't be provided in the later phases. So on that basis, it would be, in my opinion, unreasonable to require the applicant to go back and provide more affordable housing if they are satisfied that they can do it as part of the later phases. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hyman wished to come back, and then Councillor Wojciechowski, and then Councillor Baird.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I mean, I think this is slightly different to the what we call Barclay Bunny's approach, which was where we knew that that there was going to be lesser in the first stage, because when this was granted as outline, it was only on the basis we knew there would be phasing, but we certainly weren't advised. There was no way that we would know that it was going to come back with a first phase with considerably less in. And of course, this is a different scheme. It was certainly, I remember the considerations. It's further away from the town centre. There were more things against it than there were the Barclays sites. The applications for the Barclays site is just that little bit further out of town, so just maybe further into Cranley. So the difficulty that we always have here is when we're talking about the principle of development having been established, and when we're talking about that in respect of EIA developments, it's more confusing, and it's as confusing for lawyers as it is for us, I think. Lewis did very kindly confirm this very candidly on the JPC on 10th of April 2017 in respect of the development in Councillor Chris Story's area in Badshot Lee. That the catch-all principle applies to both habitats and to EIA. That wasn't an EIA application at the time we were talking about, but it was habitats affected. This is the opposite way round. This is EIA. And we have to, that principle of development, if we got it wrong in the first place because we didn't know of something, and we know of it now, and it is a significant reason and by which we should refuse, then we can, and the law supports us in that. It's down to the environmental impacts. And obviously the environmental impacts of this development, if those latter stages and the affordable housing don't come forward, would have been considered excessive. If we'd known back then that these things could melt away, there's no way it would have been granted consent because of the environmental impacts of such a large development. So, we are perfectly entitled to look at this under the law as far as I'm concerned, and I hope that that Lewis will again just reconfirm to members that the catch-all principle does apply to EIA development. So we are open to, if we wish, I think, insist that we have, that we ensure in some way, through our decision tonight, that we get those parts of the development. So, but I'll leave that to local members perhaps to fight that further if they want to. It's not my job to ask for the legal advice themselves. But thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I'll hand over to a local member then, Councillor Wojciechowski.
Thank you, Chairman. I listened with great interest to my fellow councillors, and I feel as though I've learned a tremendous amount about the way we feel about this application on the basis of some of the things that have been said this evening. And I'm more worried now than I ever was before I came in the room, because there are so many things that are unclear. And I have to say, I wholeheartedly, 100% agree with what Councillor Hyman is saying. I think it makes perfect common sense. I know we're dealing with an application before us and its individual merit, but there's a number of issues that's arisen from the debate this evening which has made the waters murky. I'm not even sure what I'm agreeing to now, and I thought I was clear before, but so much has come up from it. Councillor Townsend also mentioned about the 3 properties. And I'd like clarification on that as well. So I'm confused as to how, on balance, we can make an informed decision. And I quote from page 40 under the conclusion that it does actually say, the principle of development has already been established through the granting of outline permission for the erection of 265 dwellings across the wider site. And yet we see we've got a phase 1, which is coming at 67 with a lower amount of affordable housing. So I'm sorry, as much as I want to support the officer's recommendation, I don't feel on balance here I have that information that can enable me to do that with my hand on my heart and say it's the right thing to do, because we don't know what the future is. And I actually would go as far as to say, and it's just the way the system is that the way we have the system makes it easier for it to be manipulated in such a way that we've got no guarantees that a developer won't come back at another stage and say it's no longer viable, we can't do X, Y and Z, so we're not going to build. We should have something in our policies that say, and our constitution, that says there are penalties for that kind of behaviour. It shouldn't be allowed, because it puts us in an awkward predicament, because none of us can predict what the future is going to be, whether the developer's going to go bust or not. So we should be more robust in the first instance to make sure that we can avoid situations like this happening. And Councillor Isherwood is completely right about the Berkeley Home Scheme, but what I would say there, it was an inspector who turned that one on its head. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Lewis, do you wish to make a point before I continue?
Thank you, Chairman. Just a very quick word on EIA in response to Councillor Hyman. In the officer's report, it does refer to the fact that, County Council have had a look at this. The proposal tonight is in no way substantially different to the principle of development established to outline, and I think it's accepted that under those circumstances, further EIA isn't necessary. That's provided for in the regulations. And just more generally, I think there are risks associated with all outline permissions and all permissions in general. There will always be risks associated with viability in the future, and risks of developers part implementing schemes. There are no absolute guarantees that a development would be built out in its entirety. So I'm not sure really that the fact that this is a phased development should necessarily affect members' decision-making insofar as the issues and concerns that they have, I think, should be the same for any development of this size. That there are, of course, risks associated with them, and the council will deal with them if and when they come up. I would strongly encourage any decision should be based entirely on the matters that have been reserved for members' judgment tonight, which are set out in the report, layout, scale, etc. I think we should try to not stray too far from those, and otherwise I think that there is obviously a risk that if we refuse for reasons not associated with those reserved matters, that the applicant appeals and we get costs awards against us at appeal for unreasonable behaviour, for refusing for matters that aren't linked to those reserved matters. And just in response to Councillor Townsend, I appreciate her concerns about the 3 properties, but unfortunately, again, I think that those concerns don't necessarily relate to the issues that we should be considering tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Band, you wish to come back?
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I mean, so I, for one, accept that the outline consent agreed the principle of phasing. So I think, from my concern, you know, phasing is on this particular application is already a given. I think the issue surrounds the conditions of the phasing. And I just noticed in recommendation B, you know, we're being asked to agree that the conditions for phasing and also the details submitted in respect to the Knoll Park dwellings. Is there anything in those 2 things we could use to actually tighten up on what is required? But I need advice from officers on that. But it does seem to me, you know, on the face of it, there might be an opportunity to actually at least set out our concerns in this respect of these 2 issues in recommendation B, if we were.
Thank you. I'll just give the officers a chance to mull that one over. Councillor Ellis has been waiting rather a long time, and then Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Chairman. Actually, a number of points I wanted to raise have been raised by other people. But with regard to the Barclay Homes site, could I just confirm that actually it was the Inspector at Appeal who gave the permission or the agreement, I think the suggestion in the first place that it should be phased. We have so many properties, so many developments underway in Cranley. I have a suspicion that not all of these developments will actually be completed. I think some of the developers are already talking about phasing themselves so that, dependent on the market, whether they will actually finish the development is open to question. I mean, quite frankly, who's going to be able to move to Cranley to fill all of these homes? It's probably not relevant to this particular item this evening. But I think Councillor Hyman actually made a very valid point when he suggested that an attractive part of the proposal in the first place of this development was the parkland and the public use. And we weren't aware at the time that the development could be phased. And I am concerned that we may not, in the end, have the parkland properly developed. I support Councillor Townsend that we should certainly, if possible, have tie down the properties that are going to support the ongoing maintenance of the parkland. Otherwise, it would probably deteriorate and not be used and become an eyesore. We have no guarantees, however, that any development will be completed. Developers do go bust, that sort of thing, unfortunately. But I'm not sure we can make a proper and a fair decision on this application this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Chairman. I know it's only been mentioned briefly, but to be honest, I think this is yet another opportunity lost for a decent design of properties in Cranley. Yes, these are contemporary, but again, they've only got about 4 or 5 different house types for the whole of the 67 that are being built. I would have thought that they could have come up with a much larger range of house types, some of which reflected Cranley's existing infrastructure. Yet we've got all these boarded things which you know, appear to look pretty awful after a few years. Very similar structures, even when there's a bit added on here and a bit added on there. I would have liked to have seen dramatically different designs in different parts of this site. I mean, even the government has been pushing for changes to the design of houses so that they're more attractive. And this is not one of those examples of anybody who's actually said, how do we make this really look interesting for potential residents? You know, so I'm disappointed. And in addition to the other issues which have been raised at length this evening, I think if you put all those together, then I think it would be a good idea if this was deferred and the officers were asked to go back to the developer and come back and see how many more affordable houses could be provided. Thank you.
Thank you. Officers, did you wish to comment on? Do you want to? Councillor Townsend, do you wish to come back? Have you? Yes.
Thank you. While officers are deliberating, I just wanted to say again, and I know that it's been said a few times, but just to repeat that this application, when it came to the people of Cranley, and there was, you know, some people supported it, some people didn't, but the support and all the letters in support that came from the original application were because of the high level of affordable housing on the site and also because of the parkland. And that was a very, very influencing factor. And I know that officers have said that we're looking at certain areas under this particular application, but I would like to know whether under layout, the provision of affordable housing comes into the layout of the scheme. And also, just as a query as well on the technical space standards, for the 4B4 and 5B1 houses that are being built. So that I just wanted a confirmation that the of the numbers on there. So the technical space standards are 124 and 128, and they're going up to 142 and 190. Is that correct? Yes. So exceeding. Just making sure that those numbers are right. Nodding. Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. I mean, looking at page 28 of the officer's report, it is very clear that phases 2 and 3 are, to quote, the dates are fluid. And if under layout, then it is possible to look at the affordable housing under that heading. Perhaps officers could guide me on that. Thank you.
Officers, is that a possibility, or is there mileage in Councillor Band's suggestion about tightening up on the recommendation B?
Thank you, Chairman. In terms of the layout elements and whether the affordable housing links into that, only so far as the arrangements of the affordable housing within that layout, the principle of them being provided through the development is something that's a matter for the outline consent, and it's clear that they've come forward through a phased approach. So we're satisfied that would be something that it's not unusual that the remainder would then be made up on a different phase. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Mulliner and then Councillor Gray.
Chairman, thank you for letting me come back. One more question, in fact. I do appreciate that at outline the phasing was, I assume, explicitly stated. But was the amount of affordable in the various phases equally explicitly stated? And the follow-up question is, if not, when do we ever get a chance to comment on the acceptability of affordable housing in a phased development?
We'll give the officers a bit of time to discuss. Councillor Gray.
My question is exactly on the same issue, slightly different question. So if I could come in, do you want me to come in now? It's on phasing. I'd really like to understand whether the outline phasing was actually considered. I know that in previous applications, they've said a phasing plan must be submitted. So if that was included, did they submit a phasing plan? If it wasn't included and they haven't submitted a phasing plan, then surely in the first phase being submitted, they should actually explain to us what's going to happen in phase 2 and 3. We shouldn't be left blind with no phasing ideas. We come in with phase 1 and we put a blinkers to it and they say, well, this is what you've got to accept and trust us. We'll deliver the rest in phase 2 and 3. They really have an obligation, if they haven't submitted and this council hasn't agreed a phasing plan, to actually identify in their first submission in phase 1 what it's going to be.
On page 37, condition 4 of the consent was submission and phasing plan, and that phasing plan is submitted as part of this current application. This is what we're considering, part of what we're considering tonight.
This is not a phasing plan.
Well,
this is a plan
I'm just quoting from the officer's report here, Councillor Gray. It says submitted as part of current application. So presumably it's in here somewhere.
Yes, and if you could show me where it is, I'd be delighted. But submitting details of phase 1 is not a phasing plan, in my view.
I'm inviting the officers to comment on that.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I've just been looking through the officer report for the outline application. It just talks about the overall housing mix and affordable housing to be provided as part of the development as a whole. It doesn't specifically break down the affordable housing into phases. With regard to the condition for the phasing, page 28 of the agenda report sets out how the western section of the site would be broken down into 2 phases. There was also a plan showing for the current phase 1 in what order the dwellings would be proposed. And page 28 of the agenda report also refers to the anticipated timeframes for delivering the future phases as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Councillor Gray? No, you're not happy that that is a phasing plan?
No, I think those are just words. I mean, if the original application said there would be phasing, have they submitted a detailed phasing as to what's going to be in 1, 2, or 3? In relation to the comments you just read out, they are just aspirations. We will have another phase, and we're going to break that other phase down into 2 parts, and we may submit something equally as unacceptable in the first one, and then you'll have to guess what's going in the last one. Sorry, that's not what we should have. We should have some indication. We should have a right to ask the developer, give us your today's view of what your phasing looks like. Now, it may not commit him, but at least it would give this committee some idea of what the overall plan would be.
I completely agree with you. I think a phasing plan should have a lot more detail than this. Sorry, Councillor Byam.
I'm beginning to find all this rather depressing in a way. What are we going to do when we get the Dunsfold Park development, which is phased over a number of years? And the problem with that, the point I wanted to, and again I can't remember the detail before, but there is concern about the Knoll Park parkland development and the houses that are put in. Surely that isn't it. I'm sure that wasn't in the original application, that they would provide housing which would provide income to manage the parkland. Therefore, this is their solution to a problem. And it's come at the early stage, which means that the parkland would appear to have a level of protection in terms of income to maintain it. So, am I wrong in that? But they come forward with a plan and then said, well, is it enough? Well, they didn't say whether it should be enough or not. They've come forward with a plan to provide some income to look after that parkland.
Thank you. Councillor Goodridge.
Chairman, we seem to be advised that firstly phasing was something that had been anticipated on this site, that the matters under reserve matters shouldn't it won't stand up if we refuse this because it hasn't got enough affordable housing in this particular phase, and therefore having established we've got a risk and that really to refuse this because we haven't got enough affordable housing in this phase is not something that'll stand up, and we would be at risk if we did. I just wonder, as another thought, whether any condition of some sort of bond to ensure that the money that's being made on phase 1, which is where there's going to be a lot of expenditure on phase 2 and 3 for providing the affordable houses, can somehow be secured. It's just a thought to try and minimise the risk of and encouragement for the developers if we put in a condition that, in view of the fact that the affordable housing is below the rate for the site overall, that there should be a bond which obviously be returned to the developers when the rest of the affordable housing was built. Now, I've no idea whether that's ever been done before, but it just occurred to me that in certain situations, bonds to give some security for the person at risk it is used. And if I'm told that that is daft, I will accept it as daft, but at least I raise it.
Sorry, I'll let the officers chew that one over for a moment. Councillor Townsend.
Just as a point of clarification, please. So the condition rephasing, within the original report it said that prior to commencement of development, a phasing plan shall be submitted to and approved by the local planning authority, and the phasing plan shall include details of the location of the phases of the development and a programme of phasing for the implementation of the development. And once approved, the development shall be carried out at all times in accordance with the phasing plan. Can I just confirm, where is the actual document, the phasing plan, please? Thank you.
Rebecca.
Thank you, Chairman. There is an extract from the plan shown on page 28 of the agenda report. So that's just showing the location of how the western section, which is this area here, would be split up effectively into phases 2 and 3, along with the indicative timetable for those phases to come forward. Thank you.
Councillor Nazir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like my fellow councillor to take it on with it, because I have just spoken with him regarding it. So I'm going to second it if he takes it forward. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Nazir. Take what forward? Sorry.
As I'm thinking, we are not rejecting the application. We just want a referral for it, as Councillor Hyman said and Councillor Goodrich said as well. And instead of rejecting the application, we just want a referral for the developer to go back and rethink the affordable houses. That's what I want to do.
Thank you. And you were second. Sorry, nobody's made that proposal yet. So
I'm making that proposal. Sorry,
you're
Chairman.
making the proposal that we defer this application for the officers to try and encourage the developer to include more affordable housing. Is
Thank
that
you,
correct?
Mr. Chairman.
And to address other matters that have been concerned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Members.
That's
Yes?
the words which I wanted to put.
Do we have a seconder?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to second that, yes.
Thank you. Members, would anybody like to speak to that, that proposal before I put it to a vote? Okay, so the Councillor Hyman, did you wish to speak to the...
I just wondered whether there should also be discussions in respect of ensuring that the public park is secured, because if we're going down one direction, then...
I was hoping that I'd caught that by saying other matters that were concerning members. So,
well, design and all sorts. I mean, are we going
well,
to list them, or are
when
we
I say
going
other
to...
matters, there's obviously a lot of concerns that the officers could talk to, but
I think we should list them and be quite specific as to what we want them to look at, because I think it would be unfair to expect us to come back, look again, and then for us to turn around and say, but hang on a minute, we wanted this.
Perhaps we need a more definite proposal then. But officers, would you like to comment to that proposal first?
Thank you, Chairman. If there is a move to defer, we just wanted to make sure we're clear exactly on what those grounds are. There's no as we said, there's no the outline was clear that the development of this kind of scale, it would be likely that you would end up with a phased approach. So, yeah, as we said before.
Councillor Gray, you wish to speak to this proposal?
Yeah, I think that we could find ourselves in trouble if we go in there and saying that we are deferring this so that they can increase their affordable housing. I think what we've said in about an hour and a half is that we're slightly confused. And I think each of us have our own confusion. So it would be nice if we could actually get them to cover the fundamental point, which is clarity on the phasing. The phasing would clarify the affordable housing, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, some details. The phasing would clarify the situation with regard to the park. We don't know whether the trust houses in this phase completely covers the park or whether it needs more trust houses in the second and third. And so it goes on. There's a number of points, a lot of which formulate on this question of a phasing. Now, to me, and like Councillor Byam, Dunsfold Park came up in my head as soon as we started talking phasing, is if we have an obligation to submit a phasing plan, our officers must see that in the form of the sorts of questions we're going to ask them. That we're going to want to know what the detail is. So I would certainly recommend a deferral. I would recommend it to be really couched in a question form rather than to say we want to see more affordable houses, that we want to have clarification that all the houses are going to be built and when and in what phase. It's just my view.
Band.
Thank you, Chairman. Just very briefly, I agree completely with Councillor Gray, and I think all these issues particularly relate to the items picked up by the officers under Recommendation B, frankly, and I think this is where the issue is. It's pretty well there, but I mean, I'm quite happy to support a deferment, but I think the focus should be on the issues which were being asked to approve in Recommendation B, which we frankly, as Councillor Gray very eloquently said, have not got enough information to make a proper judgment. And I think we need the information to be able to do so. So it particularly from my perspective, focuses on Recommendation B, but I think we do need a lot more information there to be able to make a sensible decision on this particular application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Beth and Rebecca both wish to comment, and then I'll come to Councillor.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, having regard to the nature of the comments about the phasing, as Councillor Band has just said, I think it's really all focused on Recommendation B. So if members feel that insufficient information has been submitted in relation to the phasing, it would be open to members to propose a change to the Recommendation B to remove the reference to approving Condition 4 for the phasing. And also there's reference to the Knoll Park dwellings as well in terms of the clauses for the Section 106. But I think that covers it, Recommendation B, that if Condition 4 was removed, then we could secure additional information that would hopefully address the points that members have raised this evening with regards to the phased approach. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Hyman.
Thank you again, Chairman. Sorry, I don't want this to go on all night, but I wouldn't want us to differentiate between recommendations A and B necessarily. I wouldn't want us to be agreeing to everything that's in Recommendation B, apart from just one part, the words Condition 4 phasing. There is no problem, as far as I'm concerned, with the second two paragraphs in the update sheet's Recommendation B, because the details that are provided are simply, and I know that Lewis will confirm this and would want to say it himself probably, that those conditions actually are the words this, they do the job, that they have been satisfied, 411, 421 of Schedule 2, Part 1 of the Section 106 agreement, and clause 531 of Schedule 2, Part 1 of Section 106 have been satisfied according to what is required in the Section 106. So for us to say we're not satisfied with that, I think would be perverse. It's on a more general level. Certainly it does apply to Condition 4, but I would not want us to split it between the recommendations, because I think that could get us into trouble more than if we were simply stuck with what we've said so far, that you know, we do need to have further information. And specifically, I would like the words to encourage completion, because if that's what we're meant to be doing, we want the decision we make to encourage completion, not to discourage it. And that's the big complaint I've got with this. I don't have a problem with A2 Dominion. I've never had any problems with them whatsoever. But if we're doing big schemes like this, we really have to be very, very careful to make sure that things don't go pear-shaped if times get hard. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Isherwood.
Thank you very much, Chairman. All I can say is we're talking to deferral, and everything Councillor Gray has just said, I totally support. I'm with him at 100% on that.
Thank you. Beth, you wish to comment?
Thank you, Chairman. Just to be clear, it is open for members to determine on recommendation A, with the question mark over recommendation B in terms of phasing and the level of affordable housing that will be coming forward in future phases as well. I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Gray.
I have to come back on that. My concern about A is the things we don't know in B and in the phasing, and I think it would be premature to actually agree the outline. I think that no one here has really commented very much on the housing, particularly the pallets and a lot of other things that we've got in there, because we spent an hour and a half talking about our confusion. So I'd like to go back simply and say we are concerned. We can't really, at least I can't really say I could agree Part A without having the answers to Part B.
Any other comments before we... So the proposal by Councillor Nazir, seconded by Councillor Lee, is, and redefined by Councillor Gray, is that we defer this application with a view to the officers getting a more concrete and definite phasing plan from the applicant, and hopefully discussing other matters of concern of the committee. Can I have all those in favour of that proposal, please?
Do you want to check the officers that don't want to respond to that, or?
Well, they can't. There's a proposal there.
Okay.
Right, against?
2 seconds,
Sorry.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17.
Against? Abstention? 2.
Yeah.
Okay. So that application is deferred, and no doubt we'll talk about it on another evening. So we have no exclusion of press and public required. Oh, yes, okay. Could I just remind members that we have another JPC meeting on Wednesday? I'm confused. If you've got any technical questions on the applications that we're considering that evening, if you could get them into the officers as soon as possible so that they have a good chance to consider them and answer them, if not on the night, preferably before. Thank you. But this meeting is now closed. Thank We do have a briefing now on Cadastle Lane for those that are interested.
Was the emphasis on brief there, Chairman?